Start trading crypto today. Sign up for our step-by-step video series to get set up with the best trading tools, start analyzing charts, enter and exit a trade properly, and most importantly, see if crypto trading is right for you. Join us at bitlabacademy.com.
Welcome to Rice TVX. You've just tuned in for the newest episode of the Rice Crypto Show. Today's guest is Extra von Nothaus. He is a co-founder of LD2, Liberty Dollar 2, which is an asset-backed cryptocurrency. And he's following in the footsteps of his father, Bernard von Nothaus, who is the monetary architect of the Liberty Dollar. I did have the honor and privilege of interviewing Extra's father, Bernard, and I will include a link down below in the video description and above. Be sure to check that one out. Before we get into it, visit ricetvx.com and sign up for my mailing list so you never miss an update or new Rice TVX content. You will also find my various social media links and more. You can also find Rice TVX on Odyssey and Library, where I have a full catalog of my videos, post up extra content, and share other appearances. And you can also find Rice TVX on BitChute. Get your free half ounce of silver. Take full advantage of my partnership with Money Metals Exchange in 5 easy steps. 1. Visit moneymetals.com. 2. Be a first-time buyer. 3. Purchase a minimum of $100. 4. Use the promo code RICE. 5. Get a free half ounce of silver, and it's an additional way to support the channel. I will include links in the video description for everything I just mentioned, as well as everything shared on today's video. Joining me on today's show is Extra von Nothaus. He is one of the co-founders of LD2, or the Liberty Dollar 2. He is also the son of somebody who I've interviewed on the show, somebody who I have great admiration for, and that is Bernard von Nothaus. He is the architect of the Liberty Dollar. Extra, I appreciate you coming on the show. Welcome to Rice TVX. How are you today?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we can... I can follow up my dad's interview,
Cool. And obviously I'll have a link for that, and we'll talk briefly about your father, especially if what you're trying to do with the LD2 project is to embody the spirit, methodology, principles, and community of the Liberty Dollar, which I'm definitely looking forward to learning more. And so I guess if you don't mind, and I do want to let people know that me and you have talked privately. You kind of filled in a lot of blanks for me, which I think is going to help make this interview a lot better, because there was one thing that your father didn't mention in the interview with me about the law that the United States government was able to use to prosecute him. So if anybody is unfamiliar, we'll kind of give a quick summary of that. But do you mind introducing yourself to everybody who may not be familiar with who you are and how and when you got involved in crypto?
Certainly. So I got involved in crypto in 2012. Clearly, a bunch of people who were supporters of my dad and users of my dad's currency were exactly the type of people that got involved in crypto relatively early. So it was one of the supporters and users of my dad's currency that introduced me to crypto at the time, because they saw it as kind of a next generation kind of version of it, if you will. Their words, not mine. But if you're interested in money and monetary policy and those sort of things, Bitcoin and crypto was a clear extrapolation from the electronic version ELD of Liberty Dollar that my dad did in 2003. And so that's how I got involved. Really kind of trading and so forth early on. And that kind of, got me involved in other cryptos and so forth, and blockchain in general.
Okay. I mean, And that's a cool story, but I'd like to know more about who you are, because I mean, we're going to be talking about your father, and I don't want your father to, what he's done to overshadow what you're trying to do. And you've had a lot of different levels of education that I'm very impressed with. I believe you attended MIT, if I'm not mistaken.
So I didn't attend MIT. Um, so I started a few I worked on a few startups when I was living in Los Angeles. I launched a few magazines and so forth. I did my undergraduate bachelor's in physics at UCLA. Um, and then I did 2 master's degrees, an MBA and a master's in finance at Northeastern, which led me into investment banking. So I was an investment banker starting in 2011 within the Mitsubishi UFG Financial Group, which is a $3 trillion financial conglomerate out of Japan, 5th largest bank in the world. So I was in crypto before that, like I said, but then I got into investment banking and kind of learned the traditional banking world. My crypto experience did lead me into teaching at Northeastern, where I was alum, where I did my 2 masters, like I said. So I taught fintech and blockchain there at the first ever graduate level course in the MBA program. And then from that, I taught a series of public workshops for basically like high level senior executives in major tech companies at MIT. So I didn't attend MIT, but I did teach there those workshops, like I said. So it was mostly Microsoft executives, Apple executives, EMC executives who were interested in learning about blockchain, and so MIT facilitated and basically hired me to teach those courses
Okay.
to that group. So like I said, I didn't attend it, but I did teach there.
Well, I appreciate you explaining it. And obviously, I'm not a perfect individual and I don't get everything right. So thank you for correcting me.
None of us are, Chris.
I tried. I strive to achieve it, but I know I will fail. So it's just an indication that I am human.
Yeah, so that took me, like I said, when I got involved in crypto, it was more like on a trading side, just kind of feeling it out and understanding what was going on. But obviously, when you have to teach it, both at a grad level and at, workshops for senior executives at MIT, you have to dive into it a lot deeper, right? So that's really kind of filled out my technical understanding of blockchain, much more
Okay,
than the crypto trading side.
cool. And I appreciate you explaining that. So I want to turn the conversation briefly about your dad, Bernard von Nothaus, the monetary architect of the Liberty Dollar. And again, I really encourage people to check out that full interview to get a full comprehension of the entirety of what he actually accomplished with the Liberty Dollar and why he did it. But I really appreciate the LD2 project keeping that spirit alive and kind of keeping the family tradition, which of honest money, and which I do appreciate. So, can you explain in your words what happened, what your father did with creating the Liberty Dollar? And you can keep it brief. I mean, you don't have to go into all the details of that, but just a summary of what your father did with the creation of the Liberty Dollar and why you decided to continue that legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to go into it all in much detail either, Chris, because
It's a lot.
um,
It's a
it's a
lot.
lot. It's a lot. It's very dense. Let's put it that way. So yeah, he created the Liberty Dollar in 1998. It was a silver-backed, physical currency certificates, right? So just like bills, like you have dollar bills, those were all backed by silver and so forth. That went along. Like you said, he did the electronic version in 2003, and then he was growing, exponentially, essentially, until 2007. Prior to 2007, the FBI, the DOJ, U.S. Mint, everybody had said it was completely legal, that it was a barter currency, that it was a private currency, no problems at all. Hundreds of times, different government agencies said that. like I said, in 2007, the U.S. Mint came out and said, "Oh, this is now we've decided this is illegal, and he needs to stop doing what he's doing." He filed a federal case against the U.S. Mint, saying they didn't have the jurisdiction, they didn't have the authority to tell him to stop, having a barter currency because they had already acknowledged it was private. Instead of adjudicating that case, they arrested him initially for fraud in 2007 when the case originally started. There's a lot of details during his case that I could go into if you want more detail. Ultimately, they seized about 10 tons of gold and silver from the vault in Idaho, which basically proved that there was no fraud, that that my father wasn't just selling empty pieces of paper, that the silver that backed up those currency was actually there. So instead of going after him for fraud, they went after him for counterfeiting, which was a law that was written in the 1860s as a way of stopping the Confederacy from creating their own currency during the Civil War.
Let's pause right there real quick, because this is the emphasis that I really want to. This is the part that I really want to put emphasis on, because your father lost the criminal case, but the law that they were able to use to convict him of counterfeiting, because that was the question that I wasn't getting an answer from your father. And when we talked privately and you explained it, it was like everything made complete sense. Because I was asking your dad, how are they able to convict you of counterfeiting if you're not trying to replicate United States money, Federal Reserve debt notes?
Mhm.
And if that's not the case, then how are they convicting you of counterfeiting? I never got a full answer from him, and you explained it and you started going into it, but I really just wanted to take that moment to put the emphasis on what your father was able to do by losing this criminal case, unfortunately. So go ahead and explain this in 18 something, was it 60s you said?
1860s, yeah.
Okay.
So basically, the history was that the Union, right, during the Civil War was concerned that the Confederacy was going to start creating their own money, right? So there was a law passed that basically it's two sentences. It says basically, if you create a currency that is competing with the U.S. dollar, regardless of what it looks like, you're guilty of counterfeiting. So if anybody has seen the photos of my dad's currency, they are purple and blue and yellow. He never used green because he never wanted to be confused visually with the U.S. dollar, right? So
Right.
that's traditionally the counterfeiting that you and I know, right? I take a copier, I make a fake $100 bill, and I spend it, and somebody accepts it, right? This is in a very arcane law, like I said, where it says basically if you are creating a competing currency, then by definition you are counterfeiting.
Right.
And it had never been used before. It was never even used against the Confederacy when it was written in the 1860s. So by just the definition of him creating an alternative currency, a competing currency to the US dollar, then he was violating this law, this counterfeiting law. And so, because the fraud cases wouldn't stand up, because he actually did have all the silver that backed up all the certificates, as the DOJ initially thought, that was essentially the loophole, if you will, that they could use against him, right? And so when he was arrested when he was arrested by the FBI in 2009, and then charged with not only fraud, which eventually all got dismissed, but yes, he was convicted of this law because, like I said, just the simple point that he did create an alternative currency, a competing currency, and promoted it that way, did violate this law that, like I said, had never been used before.
Right. Now, the cool thing that came out of this was he was dealing with a judge that was retiring, and I guess this was one of his last cases. So ultimately, even though your dad lost the criminal charges of counterfeiting, that old antiquated law is no longer in place, and there's been a new precedent set. If I know this part correctly.
So the law is still in place, and so my father was convicted of counterfeiting under this, again, this very kind of narrow 2-sentence law from so he's definitely a convicted felon. There's no dispute about that. The prosecutors originally wanted to sentence him, wanted the judge to sentence him to 22 years. They added on they added on a domestic terrorism distinction. So they basically unilaterally said that my father was a domestic terrorist. And under the federal sentencing guidelines, that adds 50% to your sentence. So instead of 22 years, he was facing 33 years. And for a man in his late 60s at the time, that's essentially a life sentence.
Yeah, definitely 100%. I mean, if you're in your 60s, yes. If you're looking at 30 something years, that's putting you in your 90s, and most people don't live to be that long. But even if someone did live to be, let's say 97, getting out of prison after spending that much time and being that old, what are you going to be able to accomplish, and what are you going to be able to do? So I like how everything turned out. So how did it turn out?
So basically, in most cases, in most federal convictions, the sentencing happens within 2 to 3 months, maybe 6 months at most. The Judge Voorhees, decided to delay it for 3 years, which get into your earlier point of where he was retiring, the judge was. And so he waited until the very last minute of his time on the bench to sentence my father. And so instead of giving him 33 years in prison, like the prosecutors wanted, Judge Voorhees gave him 3 years of probation. So that ultimately, even when he was arrested to when his probation ended in 2017, he never spent more than a few days in prison. Which speaks to kind of the weakness of the case. And one of the things that Judge Voorhees said in the sentencing memorandum, and I was there, in the courtroom listening to it, was in most counterfeiting cases, you're giving somebody something for nothing, and you're getting something of value back to you, right? I give you a fake $100 bill, you give me $100 of product, now you're out $100, right? There's victims.
Yes.
There was never a single victim who would ever come forward and testify against my father. Not of the 250,000 people who used my dad's currency would ever come forward and testify against him. Not during the trial and not during sentencing. So essentially what Judge Voorhees said was, we have no victims here. We have nobody who has lost money. In reality, silver had gone up and gold had gone up during the time that had been confiscated from the DOJ. So everybody who owned the Liberty Dollar certificates had made money, had appreciated in value. And so related to that was the DOJ wanted to keep all of the 10 tons of silver and gold they had confiscated from the vault. And the judge said that that's not going to be allowed because my father did not own that gold and silver. It's not proceeds of a criminal organization, as the prosecutors tried to present. That the silver is owned by the certificate holders, by the warehouse receipt holders. And so to allow the DOJ to keep 10 tons of silver and gold would be a travesty of justice against the rightful owners of that. And so he forced the DOJ and the U.S. Marshals to allow a process to return all of that gold and silver back to the token holders, to the receipt holders, to the bill holders, if you will. And that set an entirely new precedent of how does a warehouse receipt model with certificates and tokens, if you will, get adjudicated when the issuer is sent to prison or bankruptcy and so forth, right? Is that the way the warehouse receipts were done with both my father and with LD2 is it's a uniform commercial code contract where the receipt holder has a contract with the vault to always have ownership of that and can redeem that receipt for the product anytime they want. And so initially the U.S. Marshals were in charge of returning everybody who put a claim in for their certificates. And then in kind of a weird twist of fate, the question was, well, what's going to happen to the rest of the silver and gold for the people who didn't ask for it from the marshals at the time in the future? And that was when the judge decided that everything that was left over should be returned to my father so that my father could handle the redemptions until 2026, which is when the last receipts expire. And as you know, in traditional fraud cases, you don't give the fraudster back the proceeds of his fraud in order to return them.
I know.
Which again just kind of like cements the kind of narrative that there was no fraud, because why would the judge go along with returning all of that to my father to have him do redemptions? It just completely,
Right.
like I said, undercuts the whole narrative on the prosecutor.
It's crazy. I mean, the government comes in and seizes said gold and silver, trying to keep it, and a judge does the right thing and makes sure that it goes back to its owners. Because, as you said, these were warehouse receipts, and they were basically like a certificate of ownership. So, I appreciate it.
One last thing, if I don't mind. If you
Okay.
don't mind.
Yeah.
So the other piece that came out of it, which I think relates more to crypto and more going forward, is the legal precedent. So Judge Voorhees had a real, well, in his opinion, he clearly has a real problem with the DOJ cherry picking a law from the 1860s that had never been used before in order to prosecute somebody today because their fraud case fell apart. And so what he did was he sent an entirely new precedent in his last order, which basically said that this law cannot be used against individuals going forward unless the prosecutors can satisfy a few different points. And one of the most important points that relates to cryptocurrency is if you want to prosecute somebody using this law in the future, you have to be able to prove, not to the judge to begin with, but also to the jury, that people are misconstruing these tokens, these cryptocurrencies, whatever you want to call them, as government-issued instruments. And so setting that bar far higher than it was before my dad's case is part of the reason of why this law has never been used against any cryptocurrency issuer and so forth. Because, in my opinion, and this is based on what the judge said, was that you couldn't convince a jury or a judge that people think that cryptocurrencies are issued by the US government. It is completely antithetical to the very nature of cryptocurrencies and any kind of alternative currency that they're issued by the government. So that was really what the most important long-term outcome of my father's criminal case was. Which
Right.
is, again, why you've never seen this the law ever used against anybody else since then. Because how do you make that argument? How do you convince a jury that cryptocurrencies are government issued?
No, I get it, man. I get it. And one, I really appreciate you taking the time to explain it, because I really feel like this is probably, aside from the fact that your father did this, created the Liberty Dollar, this was, to me, the most important thing to come out of the creation of the Liberty Dollar, because it's allowed for, like you said, the cryptocurrencies to kind of not have this antiquated law affect any growth in the industry. And then on the flip side, it allows for people to follow in your father's footsteps, which is exactly what you're doing. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the show with LD2, the Liberty Dollar 2. So let's go ahead and change the conversation over to you and what you're doing with LD2. And I know it's not you. I know there's a team. You're a co-founder. I'll share some information with the team on the screen. But do you want to explain why you decided to create the Liberty Dollar 2 that embodies the spirit, methodology, principles, and community of the Liberty Dollar currency, and why you decided to not just create your own version versus doing a Liberty Dollar 2.0 kind of situation?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. So my partner, my co-founder and I, my co-founder was one of the what's known as a regional currency officer in Liberty Dollar. So if you don't know much about Liberty Dollar, there were a few hundred individuals who had set up or were spread around the country, so that people who had Liberty Dollars who didn't want them could exchange them for US dollars or exchange them for silver and all that sort of thing. Right? So my partner and I were working on another project, and we had known each other for years. Obviously, he was involved in my dad's company, and towards the end of 2017, when my father's case was finally ending, and he was getting off probation and all those sorts of things, we were having a lot of conversations about crypto in general and our other business and so forth. And really, it was kind of a very organic process of where he and I were talking about, other, digits and some of the other precious metal backed tokens that were out there. And what became evident to us was that nobody had really used my dad's model, the Liberty Dollar model, the warehouse receipt model, to be more specific, in crypto. And we thought that was kind of surprising to a degree, because I think that if anybody between 2010, let's call it, or 2012 and 2017 had realized that, somebody would have done it. I mean, it's a very obvious, in our opinion, kind of choice, right? Like, well, this worked and this was very successful. Why wouldn't we do the same model? And nobody did. And so, with my legacy with my father and my partner's legacy of being involved with Liberty Dollar, we said, well, why don't we just do it? And so, the name LD2 kind of just became, shorthand between he and I, and our other advisor Joseph there, that you can see on the team there. And so we just started talking about, well, what would stop us from doing this, right? And who better than the son of the founder and one of the RCOs to do so? And so it was really that kind of, just like I said, kind of organic conversations that led into, well, let's just do this, right? I mean, I know the vault that did my father's Liberty Dollar, and we can get the coins minted, my father's mint and so forth. There are other mints that we know, and that's kind of like how it took off. It wasn't necessarily like a real strategic or like long-term planning of that we're going to do this. And so Like my partner is my CTO, right? He built all the smart contracts that we were on Ethereum to begin with, and we've
You guys,
migrated away from Ethereum, since then. But that was really, I wish I had a better story, but that was really just kind of like the genesis of it.
I mean, it makes sense. So, I mean, I appreciate you explaining. And you said originally it was issued as an ERC20 token and it's migrated over to the Wax blockchain on EOS.io, right?
Yeah. So at the time, so we're talking like early 2018. So my father's case and his probation officially ended at the end of 2017, right? And part of the reason we didn't do anything before that, even though my partner and I have been talking about it, was because we didn't want my dad to get any more trouble. We didn't know exactly how the DOJ or the FBI was going to take it, and so we wanted to make sure his case was completely done before we got involved in anything like this, right? And so
Right.
early 2018, we started talking about it. We started working on it. At the time, Ethereum was the big deal, right? EOS was around, other not only cryptocurrencies, but what I would describe as like Web3, right? Had come around, but we weren't really sure which one of those was going to be successful, which one was going to last, and all that sort of thing, right? And we're really in kind of if anybody was around then, the ICO kind of like market was super frothy, right?
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
ICO craze was really
people were
scammy
raising, $200 million with a white paper.
for a speculation, pure
Yeah,
speculation.
where they never knew what they were doing,
No.
right? And I was in the crypto world. I was going to the crypto meetups every week in Boston, and I was seeing, the big law firms being like, "Oh, if you pay me 500 grand, I'll make sure your ICO, isn't a security." And all of those failed. I mean, almost every single one of them, failed. And so we didn't want to get into that because obviously we had a lot of let's call them emotional scars from my dad's case, my partner and I, that we didn't want to get involved in that kind of business, right? That we had seen what happened with my dad, and that seemed too close to what had happened to him. So we started with Ethereum just because that was what was going on in 2018, and the gas fees were super low, and so that kind of made the most sense, and it was kind of low hanging fruit, if you will. But obviously, since then, that reality of the gas fees and everything has totally changed, and that's why we started looking in 2020 for a new, or maybe 2021, 2020, I guess, looking for another chain to go to.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Wax is a good blockchain. I mean, I'm a big fan of Wax, and you guys have issued some NFTs, which I just learned about, which we'll talk more about here in a moment. Excuse me.
And so it was kind of a combination of, we need to get out of Ethereum. We need to find another home, right? Another blockchain to get on. Having been going to, Bitcoin meetups and conferences since 2013, where my father was actually the keynote speaker at the very first North American Bitcoin conference in Miami. Thanks to Mo, who ran it at the time. I knew kind of like what the new things that were coming out on, and I wasn't really sure which one was the right fit. But I started going kind of coincidentally to a bunch of EOS meetings, EOS meetups, block producer kind of conventions and that sort of thing. And I found that, unlike kind of the, let's call it tribalism that was going on in crypto as I saw it, the EOS community was much more accepting, much more welcoming, much more the type of ecosystem I wanted to be involved in. So it was a little bit of the personal connections. I mean, I've known Brock Pierce for years, who was involved in Block One, and the other people that I met who were block producers, and the technology that just kind of made sense for us. So, but my co-founder, like I said, who's the technical piece of the business, he wasn't as convinced, And so we had to go through a long process to kind of figure out that, EOS maybe wasn't the right thing, but Wax was coming online at that time. And so that was probably the best solution for us.
Okay, cool. I mean, I really like this idea of an asset-backed cryptocurrency that facilitates vaulted physical ownership of the redeemable precious metals and real-time trading of those assets, which is what's listed on the website, talking about a new generation of honest money. Let's get into a little bit about, so right now the Liberty Dollar is backed by silver. So would each token be backed by one physical ounce of silver?
Yeah, so the structure that we've always used was exactly the same structure my father used, except with a better technology, right? Blockchain didn't exist, right? So he couldn't use some
Hold on,
of the
you
advantages that
broke up.
blockchain brings.
You broke up slightly. Could you repeat that part from the beginning?
So the advantages that the technology of blockchain offers a lot of advantages that my father didn't have. Transparency and those sorts of things.
Right.
Can you hear me? Am I okay?
No, you can. You can.
Okay.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
So, for example, one of the things that we implemented, which is in the spirit of Liberty Dollar, as my father wanted to do, but he didn't have the technology to do like we have with blockchain, is we set up like a multi-sig structure in our smart contracts. So when we started with LD2 0, the zero version, if you will, as we like to call it, which is we had 10,000 ounces. We had 10,000 ounces in the vault, and then we had 10,000 ounces, those 10,000 ounces audited. And so each one of those, us, the vault, and the auditor, all have their own wallet. And they have to sign off. They have to input independently how many ounces they found, right? So I say I bought 10,000 ounces. The vault says, oh, we put 10,000 ounces in your cage in the vault. And the auditor says, well, I found 10,000 ounces when I went there and physically counted them, right? If all of those three numbers align, then the smart contract through the multi-sig structure allows us to mint 10,000 tokens. So we cannot just mint tokens anytime we want, right? And we purposely put that in is because we want to make sure that our customers, that our clients know that we are not just minting tokens anytime we choose, right? We have to make sure that we wanted to set the same standard that my father had set about one token, one receipt, essentially, to 1 ounce, right? So we put in those kind of controls as order to set kind of like, and those are all on chain. Everybody can see them. You can look at if you go to the audit reports, you can see the audit reports that our auditors have done in the past.
Yeah, no, I'm on that part of the web page. It's under Vault.
Yeah, the Vault examinations.
Vault examinations.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of like we had seen what other people had been doing, and I think part of the reason of why precious metals, cryptos haven't taken off is because there isn't that level of trust, right? If I buy a token, for example, and you say there's an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver or a gram of gold or whatever it is, how do you really know that, right? They're not audited. They don't have any controls. They can mint as many tokens as they want and so forth. So we wanted to set that exact same standard that my father had. Does that answer your question, Chris? Maybe.
Yeah, it does. It does. No, it was a 1-for-1 backing. Now, any plans, just out of curiosity, to do smaller increments of silver or fractionalize by some degree? I don't know if that puts you in a weird area of regulation if you do things like that or not. So that's why I wanted to kind of ask if maybe there's gonna be like a half ounce or something to that effect.
So you can buy, I mean, on the ERC, we had it down to the same 18 decimal points that every ERC20 token would do, right? So if you wanted to own it digitally, you could own down to that fractional amount, right? And the same thing with the wax version fungible tokens now, right? You can buy, you don't have to buy an ounce. You can buy as little as you want.
But you can only redeem full ounces.
Exactly. And
So
because,
if you let's just say you DCA'd some LD2 and you did 0.1 10 times, it accumulates to 1 full coin. And if someone wanted to redeem it, that would give them that option, but nothing under a full coin.
right, so you can buy, fractional ounces as you want digitally, right? The problem comes that when you want to, well, not the problem. The constraint comes when you want to redeem it, right? And so if you want to redeem it, you need to have a full ounce at this point, right? And part of that is because that's how we started with the first 10,000 ounces with LD2 0, which is we only minted 1 ounce coins.
Which makes sense. But when you have 18
And
decimal
so,
points
right,
behind it,
because I
makes
mean,
sense too that it would make sense that there's digital fractionalized versions, but not physical. So is there a, I know I saw that there's a maximum. Is there a minimum for the redemption, or is it minimum of 1 full LD2?
1 ounce. I mean,
Okay.
we want to make it as as easy as possible for people. We don't want to set huge minimum for redemption. And essentially, the warehouse receipt model is you own the silver up front, right? So you're buying that silver, right? And all we're saying is pay for shipping and we'll send you that silver. So
Okay.
we can't, from a transparency, from an honesty standpoint, from any standpoint you want to look at, we can say we're not going to give you your silver. You own that silver. You bought that silver up front. We just gave you a receipt in the form of a token, right? We don't sell tokens, right? We're very, very clear about this, right? We sell silver and we give you a receipt, right? So it would be extremely disingenuous of us to say, oh, we're not going to give you the silver that you already own,
Right.
right? This is like you buy a TV from Best Buy online, you take the receipt into Best Buy, and they're like, we're not going to give you the TV.
It wouldn't
Like,
be just disingenuous, it would be dishonest. So I appreciate the transparency. I appreciate the vault audits. I appreciate the redemption process, the clarification. Because I mean,
now,
obviously, that's going to be the biggest concern that somebody has with an asset-backed token, especially something in a precious metal element, is how do we know it's really backed 1 for 1? I mean, because me and you had a private conversation about Tether, about stable coins, and there's a lot of question as to what backs that, but that's a different scenario. But yeah, the transparency thing I think is very important. So I appreciate you guys offering that as best as possible. And I did talk to you privately without mentioning any other asset-backed cryptocurrencies and how they're operating in comparison to what you guys are trying to do with LD2.
yeah, so I mean, again, this is kind of like what we started with the conversation with, right? Is how do we honor my father's legacy? How do we maintain the model that he proved for 10 years that works so well, right? With a more advanced technology, right? And this is just another example of that. Is the manufacturing, the fabrication of a half ounce silver coin or a 10th ounce silver coin is so expensive that we may offer that in the future, but the fabrication costs don't go down on a physical piece depending on the size of the silver, the amount of the silver, right? And so we figured that an ounce would be, and again, it's the fungible tokens are at $50, right? Would be a good minimum to get to. If you look at something like Digix, for example, the minimums is, I think it's like 50 grand worth of gold. It takes 30 days. You have to go to Singapore to pick it up. That's not a real redemption model that most people are going to accept.
Right.
So we wanted to keep it like super low. You already own the silver. Just pay us the shipping, our cost of shipping. There's no other fees. You already own the silver, and I think that's going to be a much more, well, we hope it'll be a much more attractive way and a way of proving to people that it's your silver, right? And like we don't have these huge minimums or anything like that. So,
which I like because it makes it easy for the everyday individual. Because what you had just mentioned with Digix just sounds like it's something that's for people who have lots of money and plenty of time, and some people don't have that time to wait on their assets. So I appreciate that. Now I'm sharing the Twitter page for LD2. If people want to follow, that's at LD2 Coin on Twitter, and you can also find this information on the actual ld2coin.io website. If you scroll down. Was it all the way at the very bottom, or was it?
There's a couple of different plays. We have a couple of different.
Yeah, there's social media
definitely,
information.
yeah.
There's definitely social media there. It's
Yeah,
definitely at the bottom. And yeah, right there at the top, right underneath the read the white paper or the one pager. So you guys can check out their Telegram, their Reddit. You can email them and have a Discord as well. So the one thing I noticed that I mentioned, kind of touched on earlier, was looking at the Twitter account. There's been some NFTs that are being issued on the Wax blockchain as well. What is the difference between the NFTs and the tokens?
No, I'm glad you asked, Chris. I was hoping you were going to ask that and set me up,
because they seem to be the
so,
same concept on almost like they're both representing an ounce of silver, but
yeah. So
one's a
basically,
non-fungible token and one's a fungible token.
yeah. So basically, we've created three different tiers, depending on what people want to do, what someone who's interested wants to do, right? So, the first tier is, and this goes back to kind of like, traditional silver buyers and so forth, much more than the crypto users, is, I like the idea, I like the coins, I just want to own some coins. I don't care about crypto and so forth. And so you can come to our site, you can just buy the coins, and we just basically instantaneously burn the token that goes with it, the receipt that goes with it, and you just buy the coin. So there are coin collectors who are collectors of my father's and my family. I mean, my family's been minting coins for almost 50 years. We're at year 48 at the moment. So there's people who just want the coins.
I'm 47, man. Don't add another year, but okay, you're close.
So 74 was my dad started minting coins, and so we've been in this business for a little bit. We know some people. We know a little bit, I hope. So people who just want the coins, they can come to our site. They can just buy the coins, and we basically instantaneously, like I said, burn the receipt that goes with it. Right. So those receipts are gone because it has to be a receipt or a coin. It has to be 1-to-1. So we just burn those tokens.
Okay.
So that's basically baseline. Hey, I just want coins, right? Fungible is kind of next. It's kind of tier 2. Okay, I want to buy some coins, but I don't want to take delivery of them immediately. I just want to have like a receipt for them, like I said, the warehouse receipt for the coins, and those are fungible, and I'll redeem them in the future, or I'll sell them or trade them peer to peer, or you go on Outcore and put them on the exchange and so forth, right? So that's the fungible version. All right, so you have physical coins if you just want physical coins, and then you have the fungible version. So I want a receipt for my coin, and I'm not going to take delivery right now. And there's a little more utility on that about selling the tokens, and obviously the ownership of the silver goes with those tokens, right? And then we did tier 3, which is what we just launched, which are the NFTs, right? So I want the coins, or I want a silverbacked NFT, right? So like as you're showing right here, you get like a nice piece of digital art. You go to NFT Blocks and you can buy those NFTs, and those NFTs are basically layered on top of the fungible token, which are layered on top of the physical coin, right?
Okay.
And so the physical coin and the fungibles are both at $50, and the NFT is at $60. So we put a little bit of premium on the NFT because you get this nice spinning piece of digital art, and you get the serialization of it and so forth, but all kind of within the same relative price range of what you would spend on a 1-ounce silver coin if you went and bought one retail, right? So
question. So I know Wax blockchain allows for a lot of really cool add-ons and things that you can do with the NFTs that you kind of can't do on other blockchains. And one of the things that I had learned before, now there had been redeemable NFTs, and in order to redeem what you were going to redeem for, you have to give your NFT up. But now, so I learned with Wax, they have attributes where you can burn certain attributes, still keep the NFT. So somebody could, with Wax, be able to keep the artwork, keep the NFT, redeem it, and know that it's been redeemed, so that if anybody else was to get a hold of this NFT, it would already show that it's been redeemed. Is that how you guys have this worked out, or do you have to turn the NFT in to get the physical coin?
You have to burn the NFT. Well, so two things. Those NFTs, those redeemable NFTs, that you're talking about, those are backed by other tokens, right? Other non-physical asset backed tokens, right? So you can get the Wax if you want and keep it.
Well, no, in this instance, I'll give you an example. So I interviewed Joel Comm, who's part of Bad Crypto Podcast, and he's working on a project with Sylvester Stallone called Planet Sly. And there'll be all these different ways that you can redeem different things based off the card you own. But instead of burning the card to redeem, you just burn that portion, like that. It's not actually killing a card, but it's taking away that redemption option and just burning that option. So that way you still are able to keep the NFT, but it doesn't have it takes away some of the utility of the NFT itself. Because I've always known it to be just burn it. Just turn it in, burn it. You're basically just trading the NFT in for the physical item you want to redeem. So I know this might be getting a little bit more complicated, but if it is something that you're interested in doing, where somebody can just redeem a portion of the NFT, but still be able to keep the actual NFT, so they can have it for their collector's case, keepsake case, or whatever the case might be. So I'll hook you up some information if you're interested. I don't mean to get too deep into that,
No. I'd be very interested in that.
because I'm sure somebody would want to keep that, the artwork on these, because it's really cool artwork.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we got a really great 3D renderer to do that for us and so forth, and it's definitely something I'd be interested in. My a good friend of mine who was one of the Curio Card creators, if you know Curio Card.
Mm-hmm.
He has a saying that one day in NFTs is a month in crypto and a year in the real world. So I have no doubt that there are lots of other things coming. But the way we have set it up is basically, is that you have to burn it.
Right, which makes sense.
Right.
So I just want to make sure I got that clarity on that part.
Yeah, and again, it kind of goes back to, it's kind of one-to-one, discipline that we have. Is you can't have the coin. Excuse me, you can't have you can't have the coin and the token, right? Like, you have to burn the token to get the coin, right? Because
which is part of the redemption process, for me looking at the web page, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly, because we need to keep that one-to-one token to coin, token to ounce kind of structure,
which makes sense. I mean, but with the token, there's no really cool artwork like there is with the NFT, which is the reason why I was kind of putting a little bit more emphasis on that part. So, like I said, I'll definitely hook you up with that, because I think that would be really cool thing if people can be able to keep the NFT and just redeem that redeemable portion of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's some nuances we need to go into that we don't need to dissect here. In terms of, do people know which ones are backed and which ones aren't, and so forth. And we've been one of the things we'd like to do is we'd like to have Nifty, because Nifty only shows you in their backing field if it's backed by one of their approved tokens. So even if you look at Nifty for our NFTs, it doesn't say it's backed, because LD2 isn't one of the approved backing partners, or whitelisted, if you will.
Right. You're just kind of like anyone who creates an NFT.
Yeah. So I mean, we'd like it if for in the future we'd like to work with Nifty, or that sort of structure of where it says LD20. Right, so they know, so everybody, so it's, again, it goes back to our point about transparency, right? That, like, everybody knows that backing. And like I said, if you look at it now, it says there's no backing, even though it is backed by us, but we're not one of the approved backers.
No, I get what you're saying. I might know some people I can talk to and see what can be done. So and that's something I'll talk with you more about privately, but I may be able to help out with the whitelisting issue. One of the things I kind of want to move the conversation on, and I definitely would like to be able to revisit more conversations. I don't want you to think that this will be the only recorded conversation that we have, but I really want to kind of go on focusing kind of like where we're going from here. So we have the silver-backed token, the silver-backed NFT that you can redeem for physical coins. And on the website, it has our plans, talks about LD2 step 1, LD2 silver step 2, which I'm assuming all that's complete. Aside from
LD2 zero is where we're at now. We're at the very end of those 10,000 ounces, like I said. Silver is kind of our next play, where it's kind of open ended.
Okay.
So we're not limited to the 10,000. We can continue to add volume, more silver to the vault, and issue more and more tokens, receipts essentially for those silver as we add to it, because we're not limited to the 10,000 we started with in zero.
That makes sense. And I mean, obviously, if we're going to do more interviews too, we can go into more depth on these other items closer as they come. But do you mind touching on steps 3 and 4 with the gold, and then with a card?
Yeah,
like a credit card type situation.
Yeah, absolutely happy to. So obviously, an open-ended silver. So again, we start with LD2 zero, prove it, make sure it works. Like I said, we started with Ethereum, we went to Wax. That seems to be working out well. We're happy with kind of our disciplined approach, right? We're not trying to go to the moon, in the first 6 months, right? I mean, this has been, this is a kind of a different animal than a lot of cryptos, because we have the physical assets, and so we're not just minting 1 billion tokens, so we want to make sure everything worked, and we had, the redemptions set up and the vault and everything together, right? I mean, that was really our point of kind of taking that in a measured approach. Like I said, silver is open-ended. Now that we've proven the tech works, we've proven the vault and redemptions and everything works, then now we can do LD2 silver, and we can add more and more to it. In that same model of LD2 silver, of open-ended, adding gold is just kind of an obvious, extension of that. So again, using the same vault, using the same technology that worked with silver, doing with gold is a very, very small, jump, if you will, right? It's just a matter of like what's in the vault, right? Is it silver or is it gold?
Right. It's the same thing. I mean, it's both a precious metal. It's both a metal. It can just replace one word with the other.
Right, and all the technology and all the smart contracts can be the same. You just change kind of like what the backing is, right? So it can't be 1 ounce necessarily. We might do a gram. We might do a smaller amount of gold just because it gets more granular. Like a 1/20th coin in gold makes sense, unlike a 1/20th coin in silver, where the fabrication costs outweigh the value of the silver.
Right. Yeah.
A 1/20th, like my family, that was the smallest gold coins my family mint ever made, was 1/20th in gold. All right.
Okay.
But again, it's another entry point, right? We don't want to keep it like huge that you have to buy, $3,000 worth of gold to do a redemption, right? So you, again, fractional ownership digitally, but redemption probably a lot lower, like 1/20th, 1/10th. I mean, we did 20th, 10th, quarters, half, and the full ounces, in my family mint. So I know that business very well.
That makes sense.
So there's a little bit, like, again, a little bit of difference on the redemption, just because you're dealing with a more valuable metal, and so the fabrication cost, like with silver, doesn't eat up all the value like in gold. So that's kind of like a natural extension.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and then the card.
Now, I want to pause you real quick before you go into the card, because one of the things that excites me about the idea of a card where you could spend your gold or silver in these instances, because obviously it's step 4, we would have gold and silver available, you're familiar with what happened with Peter Schiff not too long ago, right? with his Pacific Euro Bank, I think is what it's called. Where they basically shut him down, I think seized the assets.
Yeah.
And I think he was running a card as well. So,
well, we have
this
the
kind
patents
of
on it.
right. Well, this takes away, and that's another. Well, that's something we could talk about, but I guess that's a totally another conversation. But this takes away that that point of failure that Peter Schiff would have had by having this as a cryptocurrency, decentralized, and people having control of their ownership of their tokens with their private keys. That's what excites me the most about it.
That is actually not the key point.
Well, it is for me.
It is for you. It is for you. But
it may not be for everybody else, but I want to be selfish in this very moment right here. So, thank you.
Well, hold on. Well, so I'm sorry. You're right. You're absolutely right. For you, for users, that is absolutely the key point. I meant from a technical standpoint. So,
okay. Enlighten me, sir.
Okay, so right, from a customer's perspective, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry. I'm in my own, my own paradigm.
You can give me your perspective too, though. You can give me the perspective from the other side. It's okay.
Okay, so asset-backed debit cards, right? You want to talk about Coinbase's card that they did with Shift back in the day, or you want to talk about any other kind of a crypto debit card and so forth, right? None of those are actually real time. So back in 2009, long time ago,
in a galaxy far
away, when my father was doing the ELD, the electronic Liberty Dollar, he wanted to do a debit card that attached to the ELD. And so he filed for a patent in 2008, which was awarded in 2012. Actually, two of them. One of them recently expired. That basically said that it was a real-time settlement process, which meant that as you swiped the card, the request for settlement through MasterCard, which is who my father worked with at the time, determined what the value of what your holdings were in that account, locked in what the market price was, and then sold those amount of assets in your account to pay the merchant.
Sorry, I was muted. In theory, he would have figured out what the value was, went ahead and allowed for the payment to go through, and then sold the assets to then get the money that he allowed to go through to make the payment. Because otherwise, that real-time process seems like it would be slow if we had to wait for the transaction to go through of the sale of said assets.
Right. So what you needed to do was, and I can send you the patent if you want to see it. Basically, what it says is, so the way it works with MasterCard, which is who we worked with at the time, was you're talking about sub-second transaction return time, right? So if you swipe your MasterCard, it sends it through the merchant's bank to the issuing bank, and the issuing bank says, yes, there is, I'm trying to buy $100 worth of food. Yes, there's $100 in your account. Send back the confirmation, right? And that also has to always has to happen sub-second.
Right.
And so the process that was built around my father's patent was, we need to take instead of looking at the dollar amount in the account, we need to take that amount of gold or silver, look at the spot price, and then be able to return what the value at that second is of the silver and gold, in order to give you an approval or rejection at your POS system for the merchant. All right. And then that at the same time, that would lock in that price, and then the amount of gold or silver for the amount of the sale would be taken out of your account and sold at that price, and that would pay the merchant.
Now, is that patent just based on precious metals or any commodities?
Anything. anything.
So just in theory, and we can get into this like in another conversation in full detail, but with any sort of crypto credit card that's doing real-time transactions, and Coinbase would be a good example. You can have your stable coins being utilized, and I do that often. You swipe my card and it takes my stable coins.
So
would that infringe upon your IP or your father's IP at that point?
So we went to Coinbase in 2013. I guess it would, no, 2014 it would have been. After a conversation with Charlie Lee about doing this. And I'd already taken over this company at this payment processing company at this point. And we had an agreement with the largest prepaid debit card bank called MetaBank out of South Dakota at the time, and that was going to be the very first crypto debit card ever. Unfortunately, due to some circumstances beyond our control, MetaBank decided to back out of that deal right as we had signed a contract, or we were negotiating a contract with the Coinbase.
And so that was like 2017-ish?
No, 2015.
15, okay. Because, yeah, he left Coinbase Charlie Lee left Coinbase mid-2017, I believe.
Yeah, and so we had already met him. Charlie and my father had already met in 2014 and talked about this. So what you see now is you don't actually see real-time transactions like the utility patent that my father had. What you see now is you see a prepaid debit card of where you sell your crypto, and the amount of dollars from that transaction get loaded onto a prepaid card. And that's not universally, but that's generally how cryptocurrency-backed debit cards work. So they're not real time. It's not as you swipe, where you know is T0 in the trading world, that those crypto get sold, those assets get sold. They get sold, you predetermine when they sell, and then basically you have dollars sitting on that prepaid account, on that prepaid card.
Okay.
So
that makes sense though, the way that you're explaining it.
Yeah, so which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But because you're predetermining when you're selling the crypto and then just having dollars sitting on your card, you're not able to take advantage of real-time market fluctuations, right? Up or down, right? So if Bitcoin went up, or whatever crypto you're using went up, 10% today, you might have already sold that crypto and not be able to take advantage of that 10% appreciation today. Where if it was real time, you could basically sell your appreciation and not have to sell any of the principal.
Now, since and I'm not a huge fan of Coinbase necessarily, but I am utilizing their credit card with stable coins. I have done it with other cryptocurrencies, and it isn't a situation where I have to sell, like almost like what you're explaining would be like when I was using a BitPay card. If I wanted
or a Zappo card or
right, so I would have to sell my SID asset to add cash into the prepaid card. But with Coinbase, it literally, I mean, I'm assuming it's selling it in some sort of real-time fashion because I can take advantage of the volatility when it comes to the price of, just use Bitcoin, for example. Like if I was to use Bitcoin right now today, I can buy 10% more than I could yesterday because of the price jump that we've seen after the Fed rate hike stayed pretty much as expected by the markets.
So that's kind of a new thing. As you said, back in the day, if you used a BitPay card or a Zappo card or any of those, like, you had to pre-sell it and stuff.
Yeah, right? So, which sucked. It did.
Right. Which, and again, that's part of the reason of why when my father created this idea in 2009, he didn't want to do that either. Right? I mean,
maybe you should look in to see about what Coinbase is doing and what their partners are, and see if it does infringe upon the IP, unless that IP has expired.
When they did it initially, So after
especially if you guys were in talks with them and then they end up launching something that is basically identical product, but not utilizing the person who brought the idea to them.
Yeah, tell me more. Tell me more about
I think I
how
told you. I think
frustrating
I
that's
told
gonna
you
be.
enough. We'll talk more about it, but I think I
Explain
told
to
you
me how
enough.
frustrating that's going to be, Chris. No, tell me.
Because what it could allow for is a whole lot more silver to be purchased to have a whole lot more tokens out. There could be a lot of possibilities that come out of somebody infringing upon somebody's IP, and I've learned that just because I'm friends with Reggie Middleton, who technically has a patent on DeFi.
Yeah, no, I know that. See, the problem, the difficulty is that from the outside, you can see functionality, right? That's very similar. And I used to be a patent litigant consultant that worked on lots of different patent.
That must have been an exciting ass job for sure.
Well, well, no, it was exciting. It paid well.
Right, I know. Anything dealing with patents is not exciting at all. It's just it's something that I have had to learn about mainly because of Reggie Middleton, because the cryptocurrency, and I'm sure you agree with this, the majority of people from crypto come from this open source mentality. And to have a patent on something goes against that. But at the same time, if people in our space who are looking out for the industry as a whole don't do these kind of things, then entities like Bank of America, who have filed hundreds of different cryptocurrency patents, could hold technologies at bay just by owning the IP. There's a lot, I mean, you know this, there's a lot of entities that own IPs that have no intention of doing anything with it aside from stifling and throttling growth.
Yes, and
It's unfortunate.
I can't confirm or deny that I worked on a Bank of America patent litigation as a consultant. But that's a good example.
Now, before we wrap up, though, I do want to add, and I told you this in the conversation with you, with the irony of you working for banks being Bernard von Nothaus' son. That is just the most ironic thing of this entire conversation. Go ahead. Sorry.
So hold on. So let me go. Let's go back to patents for one moment.
Sure.
Just real quickly. So functionality on the outside may seem like infringement, but the way that utility patents work and the way that utility patent, specifically litigation works and infringement works, is that they have to be using the exact same process, right? So you have all these claims in your patent that says that A connects with B and B connects with C and C connects with D and so forth, right? So if you find a way to, and this is why it's so opaque, is they're not going to, Coinbase is not going to explain to me how their internal process works and whether that process is exactly the same process covered by our utility patent, right? And if it's not exactly the same process, especially on a utility patent, unlike a design patent, it has to be almost exactly the same, an identical way of doing that process, right? And so there may be a way for them to have the same functionality without having the exact same process, or put a small delay in it, which doesn't make exactly real time like we did, where we have to be sub-second, but now they're post-second. Now it's taking them 2 seconds to do it, right?
Right, and being that Coinbase is an exchange, though, too, they have that liquidity, so it doesn't have to be in real time. So it could have that delay that you're mentioning.
There has to be, and the only the way Coinbase did their first card was, one of their investors set up Shift, and they went to Mark over at Metro Commercial in New York, who I know, and they convinced Mark to do it, and so forth, and that's how it really started, right? Because, like I said, we already had a contract with MetaBank, and we had it with our program manager and MasterCard years before they did that. But you can find these little ways of, and they used I2C as their program manager. I mean, I know all these people way before Marquetta existed, and Jim was there, and all those sort of things, right? So it's it's not like, oh, you did this, it's the same thing. It's a very difficult path to navigate to actually get there, and not only a difficult path, but a very expensive path.
And it makes sense. It makes sense. And the way you explain it definitely makes sense. And I appreciate you doing that. Um, so I think this would be a good place for us to wrap up. I think this has been a great conversation. I think it's a lot for people to kind of take in. And I do, again, I will encourage people to make sure that they're checking out the interview with your father, Bernard von Nothaus, that I'll have linked down below in the video description so that people can check that out as well. I do want to have you back on the show, like I said. But before we do wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to add? And before you do, I'm just going to remind people that, just doing a quick screen share, I will have links for everything that we talked about, including LD2coin.io, the Twitter account directly at LD2coin. Also include the NFT blocks information for the Silverback NFTs, as well as the website for your father, Bernard von Nothaus, in addition to that interview that we did. So yeah, if you have any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to add extra, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Not really. I mean, just kind of like dovetailing with what you just said. I mean, obviously, if you want an NFT, the NFT block link is the way to go. If you just want the fungible tokens, just come to our site, ld2coin.io, like you said, and you can buy them directly from our crowd sale, to the smart contract. So if you're just looking to buy silver in a fungible way, that's probably the easiest way to. And all you need to do is have a Wax Cloud account to log into and buy it directly, like from us. So if there's people out there who, listeners of yours, Chris, who don't care about NFTs, who just kind of want the silver and want the receipt and the ability to, sell those on Alcor or buy them, sell them as much as they want. That's kind of the easiest kind of like entry point for people who are into silver and want to get into crypto, and the combination of the two without dealing with NFTs. That's kind of the cheapest, easiest kind of access.
Okay.
And obviously on our site, you can find out how to set up a Wax Cloud account in order to just buy those directly from us. So
Yeah,
I don't want people to think they have to buy the NFTs to get to to buy the silver, right? If they just want the silver with the receipt, which is the most analogous kind of product to my father's Liberty Dollar, then that's kind of the entry point for them.
Okay, cool. No, I appreciate you sharing that. It's definitely good information. And like I said, I really thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Just bear with me 1 second. It's going to do the wrap up and stop recording. So ladies and gentlemen, I do appreciate you tuning in. Check out the links that we talked about today. Make sure you're checking out the interview with Bernard von Nothaus as well, if you haven't already. I will encourage you, if you're not subscribed to the channel, to make sure that you are subscribed. Also, make sure that you're following me on Library, Odyssey, and BitChute, where I am posting up extra content that you will not find on YouTube due to the censorship. And I'll leave you with this. Be blessed, be the change, practice change. And I'll see you on the next show.